For me, when people ask me what is Aikido, what does Aikido mean to me, I usually like to explain the three characters, the three kanji characters that form the word Aikido. So we have the character Aikido, and the first character I can be translated in English as harmony or unity. So from the start, people can have a feeling that Aikido is about harmony. And this sets the stage for usually the next question. Oh, who can win? Can I win a fight if I learn Aikido, right? So Aikido is about harmony and unity. The second character is Ki. I think it's a very easy translation as energy, but it can also be translated as spirit. The Ki in Aikido is the Chi in Tai Chi Chuan. So we are talking about an inner energy and maybe an energy of the movement. And then Do is way, path. So Do is shared with other martial arts like Judo, or even arts like calligraphy, Shudo, right? So Aikido then, if we put all these three words together, all these three characters together, it would come out as the way of harmonious spirit, or I call it the way of harmony, or even some suggest the way of unity with the spirit. And then what people understand by spirit is debatable, right? But to me, Aikido is the way of harmony. For me, when I talk about Aikido principles, I think of 5 main forms, principle ideas that lead to good practice and technique. And the first one is the concept of IRIMI, which means enter. Not turn your back and run away, but you enter the opponent's frame of reference and control that frame of reference rather than oppose it and block it. So the IRIMI movement is the enter movement. We see this a lot in Aikido demonstrations when one opponent attacks and the person who defends himself or herself enters into the sphere of attack rather than blocking the attack. So that would be principle number 1, IRIMI, entering. The second one, and this is kind of funny because people don't know this, the second one is ATEMI, and ATEMI means strike. So we see in an Aikido demonstration that one person attacks the other person. So there are strikes in Aikido, but the focus is not necessarily on the strength and power of the strike, but rather how to learn to control and adapt to a striking element from an opponent or an enemy. The third one, and I think this is where there's a nice overlap with Tai Chi, is KOKYU-HO. KOKYU-HO means breathing. So everything that we do in Aikido must follow a breathing pattern. The movement forward, the circular movement out or inside an opponent's frame of reference is done through a controlled breathing. And this is something that I think it's very difficult to master because it's more than just a physical skill. You need a lot of practice to be able to control your breathing. So this would be number 3. Number 4 is the triangular principle, also called SANKAKU-HO. So basically in Aikido, you have a triangular stance. The locks that you make on the opponent's arm or wrist are, if you look at them carefully, they're all in a triangular shape. And if we think about it, all our wrists reach a point where you can't bend it anymore. And this is what Aikido tries to take advantage of controlling the opponent through a lock rather than breaking or hitting or punching the opponent. So, and this comes from the principle of SANKAKU-HO, the triangular principle. And it's also a base, a stance that they believe it gives stability. And the last principle that I find important in Aikido is, and maybe this is the most beautiful one, is the TENKAN principle. TENKAN means turning. So the circular movements in our Aikido, we see all these motions in Aikido, and sometimes people don't understand, why do you have to turn around and do these motions and techniques? Well, I think they are embedded in the techniques and the concept of Aikido, like movement, stay in a movement, stay in a circular motion within the frame of reference of your enemy. So I think these are the 5 principles of Aikido, and maybe the most difficult one to understand would be the KOKYU-HO, the breathing part. Like, how do you control your breathing? How do you use your breathing, both in technique, but how do you take this out of the dojo, out of the training facility? How do you use these principles in daily life? And maybe KOKYU-HO breathing is the one that comes most to mind when you are in a stressful situation. You practice your Aikido breathing, and hopefully you can, overcome that situation. In Aikido, from a skill-based point of view, Aikido can be very technical and complicated. In all the attack combinations, you can come up with at least 10,000 techniques. 10,000 techniques that actually have a name and a logic in Aikido, which is a lot. But as you were saying, doesn't mean that if you know 10,000 techniques, you are the best at an art, but rather knowing the basis of all techniques is more important maybe than just knowing every single variation. Some techniques in Aikido have a cross between Aikido and other martial arts, since Aikido was a synthesis of the founders' understanding of the martial arts. So some techniques that you see in Judo, for example, or in Jiu-Jitsu are to be found in Aikido too. And since you mentioned the concept of training with a partner, in Aikido, we also have the concept of uke and tori. Uke is the person who attacks, and he is also the person who receives the technique done onto him. And tori is the person who controls the uke and throws the uke away. But in Aikido, we don't say he is my enemy or my competitor. We actually call our training ukes as partners. They are partners in training.
Of course, as in Tai Chi.
And to be a good uke, to be a good partner in training, you must reach a symbiosis and an understanding between yourself and the person that is doing the technique, so that the goal of Aikido is also followed as like non-violence, protecting each other and protecting from harm. So since there's no competition in Aikido, there is no need to have a display of force and a display of physical superiority. On the contrary, the higher the level in Aikido, the more fluid and the more fluent their moves are, as opposed to the more strength is shown. But before one reaches even a minimum level of good technique in Aikido, one has to practice a lot of ukemi. Ukemi is called rolling, and it's pretty much the same rolls, or maybe a bit more different than you would see in Judo and Jiu-Jitsu. So if you start Aikido today, you will not learn some fancy technique. On the contrary, you will roll on the floor to make sure that you know how to engage your body with the surface of the mat or the ground. And another interesting thing that people sometimes mention, in Aikido, there are no kicks. We do not train kicking. We do not train kicking at, at a pad, on pads or anything. But what is very, very interesting and I think fascinating is that most Aikido techniques can be applied to kicks too. So usually in Aikido, you have an ATEMI with your hands or with your fist, not as much with your legs, but the same principles of IRIMI, going forward and taking the move and the momentum of your opponent, follow even if you have an opponent who is throwing kicks and punches. So from a skill point of view, I do believe that having a very strong basis is more important than knowing 1,000 techniques and tricks, even in Aikido. In Aikido, I think people have to understand that when they think of the application of Aikido in real life or on the street, they have to understand the concept that Aikido is a self-defense martial art. You would attempt to use Aikido techniques or Aikido concepts in a combat situation at the last moment when there is just a need to protect yourself. You would not be using Aikido in a bar fight to start a fight, because Aikido is a non-combat martial art. It is not a sport. It is not a sport like judo. We do not have rules of engagement and points and techniques that will score you a certain point. So the application of Aikido comes from a self-defense point of view. Now, also people have to understand that to become very good at self-defense through Aikido, you must have many years and many hours of practice. It just doesn't come like that. If you want to learn to fight, you pick up boxing or another striking martial art like Muay Thai, and then you learn a fighting skill. But with Aikido, after years of practice, techniques become second nature. Learning to step in and out of an attack is actually a life skill, also physical, but also mental. If someone attacks you verbally and you do not want to engage in a fight, in a verbal fight, you learn through Aikido, I think, through the concepts of Aikido, how to dodge a confrontation and maybe save face on both sides, or maybe save everyone from an embarrassing situation. But Aikido can be used, I believe, in real life street defense. But to do that, and this is, I think, where some Aikidoka fail. First of all, they fail to understand that Aikido is for self-defense. So you would not go and say like, okay, hit me, let's see who's stronger. So that there's a concept misunderstanding there. But for an Aikidoka to test his techniques in a street scenario, they need to remember, they need to practice that with a non-compliant partner in order to become street effective. Because in Aikido, the uke is compliant. There's a harmony between the two. The idea is not for me to catch you unguarded and to punch you in the face. On the contrary, for me, as uke, as the person who attacks you or who engages you, is to help you improve your technique and reach an understanding of your bodily motions. So this is maybe sometimes you see, and it is true, and we have to admit it, that sometimes you see Aikido practitioners picking on another combat martial art, a striking martial art, and they don't do that well. And I think my opinion is because their understanding of what they're doing is wrong. And Aikido is for self-defense, but it's more than just a physical fight. It's also a mental game and a spiritual game and an inner peace game, right? Learning how to breathe and control your breathing in a stressful situation. So I think this is where the application, like technical application on the street, comes. And then of course there are the health benefits and the self-esteem benefits and the benefits to your, to your own image, both mentally and bodily. Although Aikido seems very fluent, very fluid, there's a lot of movement in Aikido. When you walk into a dojo and you see people practicing, there is also stillness in Aikido. As you mentioned in Tai Chi, in Aikido, there is also stillness, and actually training begins with a brief period of meditation in Seiza, when you stay kneel down on the mat, on the tatami, and you practice both your breathing and also you're trying to clear your mind to prepare yourself for the coming practice session. So there is stillness at the beginning of a training session, and then there is also stillness at the end of the training session, where after the master calls keikoji, as in like set up your uniform and go into seiza, line up and kneel down in a kneeling position, and again fold your arms and close your eyes and try to regulate your breathing back again to a more relaxed and maybe a more stable breathing after your physical effort. So there is stillness in Aikido too. And I love that, but also maybe it's one of the very difficult parts of this martial art, because to stay still for a minute, half a minute, some masters would even make you sit still for 5, 10, 15 minutes. Apart from the aches and pains on your knees and on your back, your mind is also running wild. So it is an amazing self-awareness practice. And it is very similar, I believe, with what Tai Chi Chuan is trying to achieve through Qi and meditation. Yoga also, to a very large extent, tries to teach practitioners to regulate their breathing, their posture, and also their thoughts.
I was saying, yes, all these, they are part of the whole. All these complete each other, all these arts. And all of them taken separately, they act as a whole. So this is a wonderful concept of union. As you said, harmony and union, Aikido. So this is also Tai Chi, this is also Aikido, this is yoga. All the methods, they take us to the path of wellness, to the path of symbiosis with an opponent, with a partner, with a business partner, and so on and so forth, with life itself.
The philosophy of Aikido was crystallized by the founder of Aikido, a Japanese man called Morihei Ueshiba. And unlike Tai Chi, that has different families that grew Tai Chi and Kung Fu into different kind of branches and schools, in Aikido we have one founding master, one founding father, Morihei Ueshiba. He was born somewhere late 1800s and passed away mid-late 1900s. And in the Aikido community, he is also known as O-sensei, the great teacher. And in Aikido, he basically synthesized his understanding of the martial arts that he practiced. Throughout his life, he traveled around Japan and learned from different martial arts masters and from different schools. And he reached to a point where he had his own understanding of what martial arts are. And to him, and I will quote now, he said that the philosophy and the goal and the objective of Aikido is true victory final victory over oneself here and now. You see, it doesn't mention anything about hitting an opponent, about overtaking an opponent, but actually talks about yourself and how you must reach victory over your own self, physical, mental, spiritual. And as in Tai Chi, there is a level of awareness, because he said, and I quote, "Here and now, be present in the present, know your environment, understand yourself, understand the environment, and then by extension, through techniques, if you are in a combat situation, you will be able to defend yourself." Because Aikido for him remained a self-defense martial art. And he was totally against creating a sport out of Aikido and creating a competition out of Aikido. The same way it happened with Jiu-Jitsu and Judo, which Judo is now an Olympic sport. So the philosophy of Aikido, if I were to summarize it, would be defend yourself, self-defense. And at the same time, protect the attacker from injury. That's why in Aikido there is a symbiosis, an understanding, both physical and sometimes even energetic, between uke and tori, between attacker and the person who's doing the technique. Because the founder, Morihei Ueshiba, opposed violence and opposed aggression. And if people understand that, if they walk into the dojo and they see Aikido as a self-defense, non-aggressive, peaceful martial art, then they understand the true meaning of Aikido, especially that Aikido has the character I, which means harmony or love or unity.
Yes.
So this is my understanding of the philosophy of Aikido.